So brand new project here. I have a server.js and a git ignore. That's all I'm starting with. What is the first command I need to do from here? Jeff.
Install MongoDB.
I'm still missing a very important file.
Oh, you need to do init -y.
Yes, the init. I need to initialize my node project. Great. And it knows the server is my main file. So now I need to install, as Jeff said, Express, Mongoose, Morgan. But we're doing all three parts at once. So what are the other dependencies we're going to need for user? .env.
What is it? Express, JWT.
Express jot. Ooh.
Dang it, I know it.
Two more. Fortunately, that's a front end. JSON web token, and one more used for encryption. Bcrypt. All right, so we've got Express, Mongoose, Morgan, .env, Express jot, JSON web token, and Bcrypt. That is our backend dependency stack for what we're building. So I'll hit enter and let them go. Let them go. And go to the server. So let's set up the server. And I'm just going to type out the boilerplate. Stop me if there are any questions on what we're doing here. What's that? I could, but I'm not a fan of shortcuts until I have it memorized. While I have it memorized, I'm assuming after doing it twice, you don't. So let's type it all out.
So you not need to install MongoDB?
No, MongoDB was installed globally on your computer. It's running on a server constantly. We just have to connect to it with Mongoose. We need require .env, .config. We should probably make a port. We'll use 7000 locally. Anything else we need to import on this file? Don't think so. Oh wait, there is. Express jot, yeah. Great. So that's filled out nicely. What is the next section we do here? For following the pattern how I've been writing these out. Middleware, specific middleware, because really Express is nothing but middleware. But these are middlewares that fire on every request. That is, we tell our server to use express.json, which gives us the rec.body. Rec.boy, rec.body. Then we have Morgan, which is our logger. All right, after the middleware for every request, what are we setting up? Connect to the DB using Mongoose. So we'll say mongoose.connect through the MongoDB localhost. And what's the port number MongoDB is running on locally? 27017. And we'll name the database. What is our, we're going to do a one-to-many relationship to keep this relatable, but also pretty simple. We're going to have users. What should the users be related to? Huh.
Pictures.
Pictures. Yeah, let's do an Insta jam. And we went with it. Thank you, Jeff. And then we'll say console.log. Let's do a little symbol here for fun. Connected to the DB. All right, we have 4 configurations for our MongoDB connection. What are they? That's right, there's use new URL parser. What else is there? Use, find, and modify. Do we want that true or false? False. That's the false one. So the other two are true. What are they? Yeah, and an easy way to find these, if you can't remember them, just type the word use, and it'll tell you what's available. We need create index and unified topology. So true, and use unified topology true. All right, our database configuration is complete. What comes after that? Routes. And the two routes we're going to start off with, app.use to /auth, because we're going to set up our setup and login first. So that will require a full file we haven't made yet, but it'll be in our routes folder under auth router. And then one other endpoint we set up, this is our gatekeeper, our security gate. It is in the middleware, so we app.use. What is the endpoint that we set behind this security? API. And what do we require, or what do we use, sorry? ExpressJot. It needs an object to know, hey, check the secret on the token to see if it matches the local secret. And that's all we'll have for now. We'll get this working and then we'll set up the rest. What comes after routes? Error handling. We'll app.use error, rec, res, and next to tell Express that this is an error handling middleware. We'll console.log the error so we can see it in our server. And then eventually we'll return res.send an error message, which is the error.message. But because of ExpressJot, what is the little if statement we need to do in here as well? Because ExpressJot might throw an error if we don't have a token. We need to make sure we handle it here. If error.name is what? What is the name of the error that ExpressJot will throw? Unauthorized. What's that? Unauthorized. I forgot what the other word is.
I'm looking at it.
Yeah, what is it? Unauthorized error, like that? Or the full word? There we go. If that's the case, the reason we're doing that is so we can set the response status to the error status coming from ExpressJot. And then we'll just send the error message the same. Okay, error handler's done. The last thing we need here, listen. So app.listen to our port and console log. We'll do another thing here. Server is running on port. Now, do we add a port environment variable locally? Do I need to put a port variable in my env file?
No.
No, we don't. Why? Because MongoDB is going to be using this variable, or Heroku or Netlify or any of those are all going to have a process environment port that they serve your project on. We need to make sure that our project can adapt and use their port when we deploy it and use our locally. So we're not going to create this in variable. It will always be undefined locally. Once we deploy it, this is what will be used. And there is the server boilerplate now with user authentication in mind. So not too much gets added, right? The only thing that gets added is ExpressJot, auth router, and this if check on our error handler. That's what's added to the server when we're doing user auth. Oh, and the .env. So let's set up that. Let's create our .env file and give it the secret. We'll say Harry Jurassic Pineapple Dogs. Pineapple Dogs. There we go. Pineapple. We have our secret. So we can shut that down. We're done with the env file. Once I get the server set up, what is the next file I should be creating? Models. Sure. Let's define our data before we define how we use our data. So we'll make a models folder And the model that we create first is our user. We'll pull in Mongoose. We'll pull out schema from Mongoose. And then we'll create our user. But there's one other thing we'll need to require on this file. If we're doing all three parts at once, there's a module that our user model is going to need to use that we installed. Bcrypt. Yes, it is in this file that we do the user password encryption, or we write that hook. So we need to require it so we can use it here. Okay, so const user schema. Use the new schema. And we'll module exports a Mongoose model called user from the user schema. All right, we'll give them a username and password. And that's all we really need for the sake of example, but if there's anything else we'd like to add. Actually, we'll add one other thing here because a few of you are approaching projects this way. So we'll say username is a string, it's required, it's unique. And to make sure it's unique, we'll lowercase it as well. So this makes sure no duplicate usernames can be created. Password also type string and required. Let's do another Boolean here. Let's say this is a website where we have two different types of users. We have the basic customer client, someone that's coming to your site to get some sort of service. But then we also have like administrators or someone that manages the site. So they'll have different privileges on the front end that regular users won't. We can set that up here. We'll say user type. The type will be a string, and we'll just use an enum to say they either sign up as a customer or an admin.
Would you really want someone to be able to choose admin though?
They won't have the choice to, so that when we set up the login and sign up form, everyone will be a customer. You'd have to handle this a couple different ways. It depends on what you want to do. You can either create your admins first and tell them like this is your credentials, and so it's hard coded, or there's a separate login place where they log in or sign up a different way that only an admin would be able to do with like a secret password or something. But with this, it allows you to have two different types of users. Another way to handle this is you could just say, instead of user type, you could say is admin, and it would be a type Boolean, and the default would be false.
Yeah.
This will work the same way. So this might be a little bit easier to handle since it's just a Boolean, so we'll do that. But this allows us to differentiate between two different types of users. All right, so that's all we're going to do for our user model for now. But there is some functionality we need to build into this user model. There's three things we need to do. One, we need to be able to encrypt users' passwords on sign up. We need to be able to compare encrypted passwords on login. And we need to be able to remove the password before sending the user to the front end. So three functional things we need to build into this user model. So we'll start with encryption first. Where are we? There we are. Now this is a part 3, right? We waited till part 3 to do this. We're setting up everything as we go here. So file by file. How do we encrypt the password? What is the method we write? What type of method is it? Is it a regular method or? It's a pre-save hook. So by the name, it should run right before we save a new user. So we're going to say, hey, user schema, you have a pre. You're going to do this function is going to run before something. What is it going to run before? We're going to run, and notice there's a lot of things we can run a hook before. Before remove, so before this user's deleted, do this. Or before you find it, do this. Or before you update it, do this. We're going to say before you save it for the first time, call the following function, and this function gives us access to the next middleware function, so we can say, this hook is done, move on to the next thing. Why do we have to use the function keyword on this hook? Do we remember? Because if you don't use the function word, if you use a fat arrow, this will break everything. You need this. So we're going to say const user equals this, just to say that this is the user that this pre-save hook is being called on. Whoever is currently signing up is this. Then we have this line that we add to check if this is purely the first time they're signing up. So if the user is modified password, return next. Now this shouldn't have to run, but if something funky happens and someone's signing up and they make it this far, this will make sure that their password isn't encrypted again. So if this is the first time they're signing up, we need to hash their password. So what is the method on bcrypt that allows us to do that? bcrypt.hash needs 3 arguments. What's the first one? It's the plain text password. It's the thing that we need to hash. The second argument is salt rounds. You can see here, salt rounds. We're going to say 10. And the last argument is a callback function that will give us either an error or the encrypted string. So we're going to say give us the error or the hash. We are in Node. Node is an error handling first software. If we don't handle errors first, things break. So we're going to check if there was an error, then just return next with the error passed in, and that will go to our standard middleware handler. If there wasn't an error, if we did receive the hash password, we need to overwrite the user's plain text password with the hash. So we'll say user.password is now equal to the hash. We can call next and tell it to move on to the next thing. That is method number 1 for our user model. Any questions on the pre-save hook?
Would it be valid to return to next also?
Yeah, you could return next. I only return next if I had like more code down here, so I don't want it to run. This is going to be the end of the function anyway, so once it returns to this next, it'll exit out just fine. All right, next one, compare encrypted passwords. So this is not a hook, this is a method. So how do you add methods to a schema?
Method.
Yeah, you say, hey, in your dot methods, which is an object, add the following function, and we'll say this one is called check password. It's the one that's going to use bcrypt to decrypt the encrypted password, compare it against their attempt, and let us know whether or not they are verified. Well, this is also equal to a function that needs to use the function word. And this function takes 2 arguments. It takes the user's password attempt on the login, and it takes a callback function as well. So what kind of function is check password? It is a method because it's a property of an object, but it's also a higher order function because it is a function that takes a function as a parameter. Just like map or filter, it's taking a callback function. So what we're going to do with check password is we're going to use bcrypt again to compare the user's encrypted password to the plain text password attempt. So we say compare the plain text password attempt to the user's password, which will be this dot password, whatever user we're calling this on. And compare will do this comparison and come back with either an error or a Boolean. Well, more than likely, this error is never going to occur. This would occur if they try to log in without a password. There's nothing to compare. It could say error, something is required to compare. Most of the time, we're going to get this is match Boolean back. And it's going to be true or false. The passwords did match or they didn't match. But just for the sake of coding in Node, we're going to handle our error first. If there was an error, we're going to return instead of next. We don't have next here. We have our own callback. So we're going to say return the callback with error in the first argument. If there wasn't an error, use our callback and pass in isMatch as the second argument and a falsy value, null, as the first argument. We'll come back and look at this when we use it because we are the one providing this callback. And we're going to receive either an error or our Boolean. All right, and then we have the last method. Unless there's, for right now, is there any questions on check password? We will come back to it when we implement it. Okay. The last one then. We need to strip the user's password from the object before we send that object to the front end. We never want the password on the front end. So we're going to add one more method to the user schema, user-schema.method. Remove, or rather without password, is a function that removes the password. So inside of this function, how do I get access to the user that this is being called on? This, yeah, because inside of our other file, we're going to say user.withoutPassword, which makes this user the context of this for the function. So we're going to say const user equals this, but we need it as a JavaScript object so we can remove keys from it. So we're going to convert it to an object. This is a mongoose method here. Okay, then we're going to delete the user's password because without password is happening after it's been saved and hashed, so we don't need it in the object anymore. Then we can just return the user and tell it to keep going. And that is everything we need for the user model to start user encryption or authentication. Yeah, Mark? Yeah, so this, we're going to be calling this function on a user object that comes back from a user.find one. And that object that comes back isn't a JavaScript object. It's like a JSON type object. That's how MongoDB is storing it. I think it's called bson. So this converts it to a pure object so we can delete keys. This isn't anything specific to Mongoose. If you haven't seen delete before, you can do that on any JavaScript object and tell it to delete a specific key on that object. So we're turning them into an object so we can delete the password from it and then return them without that attached. Okay. So we'll come back and look at this as we implement it. But now that we have our data defined, we have our user defined, where is the next file we create? We then go to how is that user interacting? Yeah. And the main interaction we were concerned with first is authentication. So our server is already referencing the auth router now that it exists and our user exists, we can start making it. So let's pull in express. Let's make an auth router, is the express router. What else are we going to need to import on this file? Yeah, let's pull in our user model. So .. to go up a level, then down into models to find the user. Before I forget, I always module.exports the auth router. Now I'm going to start up the server really quick because I want to look at an error that everyone will run into, most likely. Just a minute here. Okay, I've got a crash. Where do I look in here to figure out what's going on? Okay, yeah, I got to scroll up. All right, type error. Router.use requires a middleware function, but got an object, and it says it's on. Let's see, we're scanning down here.
So return user.
Server.js line 26. Let's look at it. What's wrong with that? That looks right. What is this? Requires a middleware function but got an object. That's such an ambiguous error. What is it saying? Well, it's saying that use middleware functions require a function to fire. It says use the following function. It's saying that this is not a function. It's saying this is an object or something that's not valid for the router.
How do we receive the user?
So if it's saying this is not right, where do I look to see why this is not right? Yeah, let's go to that file. And what's missing from this file? It's not being exported. So this is a really ambiguous error that a lot of people run into. All it means is that the router file you're trying to use is not being exported. So when you're saying, hey, use this file, require it, require is finding nothing and returning an empty object. Right here. But as soon as we module.exports the auth router, we're back. Cool. 2 routes we need to build in here. Sign up, login. And we're building this as its finalized point because we have everything in the user that we need. So auth router.post /signup rec res and next. What is the order of logic of a signup? What is the first thing we want to do when someone says, hey, here's the username and password, I'd like to be a user? 1, check if that username is already taken. All right, we'll check if it's already taken. If it's not taken, what do we need to do? Is there any other like security type things we need to check on a sign up for our intents and purposes? No. So yeah, here we can then just save the new user. If the username is not taken, we're letting them have it. Now in like big companies, you're submitting emails and all that. They're doing a lot of validation. They're validating all of, you're making sure your username isn't duplicated. They're also making sure your email is valid. They're even sending you an email to say, click this and validate your email. There's a lot more that goes into it. We're just kind of doing a slimmed down version of that. So we'll see if there is taken. We'll save the user. If not, we'll then create the token and then we'll send the response. So what else do I need to pull into this file? Up here, there's one more module. Yeah, we need the token so we can create it, or the job package. All right, so we'll see if that username is already taken. We'll say user.find1, and we're interested if there's a user by the username equal to the requester's username, and we'll lowercase it to make sure the comparison is comparing correctly to all the lowercase usernames in our database. That'll come back with either an error or a variable called user, or that we're calling user. It's known, so we're going to check if there's an error. If there was, we're going to set the regular status to 500, server error, and return next with our error. If there wasn't an error, we need to know, does this user exist? Did we find somebody that has the username that's being requested? How can I phrase that question? If user, right, because if it finds a user, this will be an object, but if it doesn't find a user, what will MongoDB return? Null, it will be falsy. So if this is a truthy value, we found a user, let them know, res.status 400, and return next. But we need to make our own error, so we're going to say send forward a new error with a message that username is already taken, or however you want to phrase that. All right, they've made it past all of our security checks for sign up, so we need to save the user. How do I save the user? Cool. I need to say new user.save, but do I have my new user object yet? I don't, so I need to make that first. I'll say, hey, the new user object is a new user, use the user blueprint. And then how do I get the user's information to make this object? Rec.body. So it's a, hey, take the user's object. This has the username and password, create a new user from it using this schema. And now we can say, save it. And that'll come back with either an error or the saved user. What is happening right here? Is this immediately calling save? So we say new user.save, but there's something that happens right here. Save is not the first thing that fires. First thing that fires is our pre-save hook. It intercepts that user, it hashes their password, adds that to the object, and then says next, okay, you're good to go save the user now. We've replaced their plain text password with a hashed version. And then the save goes out and comes back with one of these two. So we'll handle the error. But if they made it this far, they have signed up successfully. So our last two steps. Create the token, send the response. What is the method we use on JWT to create the token? I know, like a million questions today, making you think every step of the way. Sign. Sign the following token. It needs two arguments, and we can see it right here in this little snippet. Sign needs a payload, and it says object, but no, sorry, sign needs a payload, and then it needs a secret or private key. So our payload is the user, save user, but we don't want them to, well, two things. This needs to be an object. Right now it's JSON or BSON. And secondly, we don't want it to have the password. Where currently the password is still in this object. So what do I call here to get rid of that? Yes, so without password. Right, so if you recall what this does, this is the context of this for without password. We will grab that user that we're calling without password on, we'll turn them to an object, we'll delete their password, and then we'll return them. So that's actually what's being added as the payload. Then for the signature, we're adding our process in the secret.
Since we did the config on that server file, it's not like that's taken care of.
Yeah, so now we can send the response. Return res.status 201 for successful creation, and .send an object that has the user, which is the saved user without their password, and the token. And that is the final sign-up route with all three parts in mind. It's a fair amount of code, so any questions on the flow of logic here? Is it easier to look at than the first time we did it?
Yeah, maybe we're kind of bouncing around.
First time we bounced around a lot because we're building one thing after another, then building onto it. I like doing it this way as well, so we can just see it if you're doing one file at a time.
That's all user off.
Yeah, the sign up route's done now. I don't have to worry about anything. It's got encryption. It's got the password stripping out. We got tokens. Sign up is doing what it needs to. So I think it's a fair time as soon as you get your first route built to test it. Let's make a user and sign up and see if we get back a token and the user without their password. So let's go to Postman. Does the Postman can to 7,000 auth sign up? Great. Got Morty as a JSON body. We'll hit send. There we go. And where else would I look to make sure my server received this request? Yeah, my server console, Morgan is going to let me know everything that's happening. Morgan says, I just got a post to auth sign up. The request went well, 201. And there's evidence of that now on this page. So we know sign up works, we can move to login. And once login's done, our user auth portion of all this is done for the backend. So let's get that done, maybe take a little break right after. So auth router.post to login, rec, res, and next. So we talked through the order of logic, the flow of logic in our sign up. You know, we see, do they exist? If they exist, don't let them take it. If they don't exist, create the user, create the token, send the response. What is the flow for a login? What is the first thing we need to check?
If they exist.
Same thing, yeah. Does a user by the submitted username exist? Okay, if it does, what is the next thing we check?
Password match.
Does their password match? If both of those things are true, create a token, send the response. Now, when you break it down to small steps like this, you're like, conceptually that makes sense, but now you have to implement it with all the intricacies of error handling and the methods that we made, so it gets a little harder, but the flow of logic isn't too bad. Do they exist? Do their passwords match? Great. Make a token, send them the data. So again, we'll do a user.find1, and for the same purpose, we're seeing, does a user by the submitted username exist? rec.body.username to username.to lowercase, check for that. It'll come back with either an error or the user. Handle the standard error, res.status, return next with the error. But then now, am I concerned, do they exist or don't they exist? How do I want to phrase this question? Because remember, in sign up, I want to know, do they exist? If so, that's a problem. Yeah, but the login, it's the opposite. I want to see, do they not exist? Because if so, that means they gave me the wrong username. So if the user came back as a falsy value, if not user,
Yeah, that's what I said.
yeah. So if not user, then you gave me a bad username. So res.status 400. Return next with a new error. And what's a nice error message to not give away the game? Username or password are incorrect. Beep. Try again, dummy. Okay. Yeah, you can be really rude to your user if you wanted to. All right, so this is all this code right here is just to see, do they exist? If they do exist and the username matches, we now have them. This is the user from the database. This is the user that has the encrypted password. What is the next thing I need to check? How do I see if my user's password matched, right? Just say if user.password.
Couldn't you just put if not user or user.password?
We did before, but now we have encrypted passwords. So if this will not work, if I say if user.password is not equal to rec.body.password, this will always be false. Why?
I'm in the same line.
Yeah, and this is why we can't do it in the same line. This will always be false. It's encrypted. This is encrypted. This is plain text. So we need to be able to decrypt this and compare it. Well, good thing we thought ahead and we wrote a method called check password that takes the password attempt and a callback function. We're going to spend a minute or two on this because it shows you the power of callbacks, being able to go back and forth between files. So instead of doing this plain text check, we're going to say user.checkPassword and use our function. What two arguments does our function need? Let me make this full screen and we can compare it side by side.
This password and then the hash.
So here's the check password function. What are the two arguments it needs? Password attempt and a callback. Callback, okay. Well, let's give it the password attempt. We know what that is. That's the rec.body.password. That's the one they just sent to us. But then how do I give this a callback? All I need to do is say, here is your function. There's your callback. So I gave it a fat arrow function as the second argument of check password. If I pull this up here, this is what we have. We're saying check password, here's the password attempt, and here's the function to call once you figured out what happened. So this is not happening immediately. This is getting passed into our function. Our function's receiving this arrow function. It's then gonna do the comparison and then either call our arrow function with an error in the first argument or null in the first argument and our Boolean in the second. So it's a really important thing with callbacks. Know that this is not being called immediately. This is being called immediately. It's taking our function as an argument so it can call it later. It's a callback. It calls back to it when it needs to. Well, when it calls our callback, what might it give us?
It's the match or null.
Either an error in the first argument or the match. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to account for both of those just like we do with all these mongoose methods that come back with either an error or the thing we're looking for. So come back with an error or the isMatch Boolean. And we can handle it. So once this is called, that means check password is complete. And we can check, was there an error? Res.status 400, return next with the error. Close this now. Am I done here? Am I ready to create the token?
No.
What am I missing?
I think that's a match.
Yeah, I want to see, did this come back as true or false? Because that's a big deal. Was the password right or wrong? So if it was not a match, tell them so. Res.status 400 and return next with a new error. It says the same thing. Username or password are incorrect. But after this, are they secure for our intents and purposes?
Yes, I look at it.
I'm just letting it delete stuff for a second. Not frustrating at all. Give me
You still need to join.
a second. It's it's thinking. I'm afraid to touch anything really.
Windows, is that an Apple that you guys work with or Windows?
Yay, we're back. Okay, Mac, all Mac. So yeah, now we can create our token. So const token equals jot.sign a new token. We need to send in the user object without their password. Where is that user object? It's the one we got way up here from the initial find. Did they exist in the database when they're logging in? Well, then we can send that to them. So say user without password. Just take that out and then send them to the front end or put them in the token and then sign the token with our secret. And we can send our response. So return res.status 200 because we successfully logged in, .send an object with the user, which is our user without password, and the token. And that is the whole login route with all user auth implemented. You can see how these routes get more and more complex and why backend development and database development is its own career. I say we test it, make sure it works.
Doesn't like that.
It doesn't. Let's see if the server's breaking. It is. Oh, goodness. Where do I look?
Scroll up.
Okay.
Scroll down the line.
Unexpected end of input.
Scroll up.
Oh, that's it. Auth router, line 63. Saying right here, unexpected end of input. What does that mean?
Probably got a bracket missing somewhere.
I've got a bracket missing somewhere. One of the more frustrating errors. So what's the easiest way to solve this kind of problem? Start with the opening bracket and see if it has a closing match. It doesn't, okay. Does the next bracket we create, this parenthesis, does it have a match? Ah, it does. Does the next function bracket have a match? It does. So what are we missing?
No, that's the wrong.
We're missing this. One more bracket, so. Oh, nope. Spoke too soon. It has a match now.
Is there a way to match up the colors?
The colors are matching. That's the confusing part.
Yes.
Who sees it? Who sees it?
Diana.
Where at? Yes, that's for the post. We have to put that one there. And that one has its, but yeah, it doesn't have any closing.
What has that one there?
Oh
The
boy.
next
So does that just mean we need, yep, good eye. So I started here saying this was the first one. Diana corrected us. This is the first one. This closes everything. All the code we just wrote is inside of this post request. Yes, applause is due. This is never a fun problem to solve. But it's solved, so let's test it. Let's try to log in as Morty. Log in. Actually, I don't want to change my template. I will go to my login template. Morty will send. And there we go. Let's try to do a failed login just to make sure. Mort. Okay, it works if the username is wrong. What about the password being wrong? Great. Winning.
I think it's supposed to be
Mort.
Mort.
Morty.mort.
Yes.
I missed it. All right, and that is the complete backend user auth setup. Now, obviously, there's a lot more you do on top of this, but this is what, if once you get to this point, setup login works, you can start building your actual application on the back end. You can then now build your other models, your other routes, test all of those, relate them to users, all of that. And once that is tested, you can then go to the front end. I think this is a good moment to take a small break.